If you want to support my content here on Thorin's side, then as well as my Patreon, which I very much appreciate the support from, you can buy some Gamersops, the delicious energy formula. And now they've got a new product, boys. It's actually, obviously it's Gamersops, so it goes out saying there's some like sexualized anime woman there. It's tea. That's right. They actually do gamer tea. And they've got 4 different varieties in here. We've got this one, we've got a black tea. Classic for that. They've also, you notice, made the logo look a bit like some cleavage or an arse or something. I think it's supposed to be cleavage, I would guess, but they're being a bit naughty with the leaves, aren't they? They've got ginger turmeric. They've got a yerba mate. And then this is probably the one you're going to be most interested in, which they've got this one, which is caffeine free. And you have this one, sleepy time with theanine before bed. And I can tell you, theanine is really good if you have a trouble getting off to sleep and actually dropping off. And you're one of those people who just lies there for hours. Like, basically, that's something I often take as a supplement anyway. So this one with no caffeine in, this is going to be legit. If you're a gamer, you're enjoying your games during the day. And then at night, you want to have a nice chill out little hour before bed. Drink some of this, get off your phone, and then off you go to bed. As always, if you want to support me, use the code Thorin for 10% off at gamersups.gg. Now then, I thought what we'd do is we do another one of these videos where it's like, I give you my recommendations of 10 of a certain thing. We've obviously done one in the past for like rap albums and albums in general and movies. So I thought for this one, we'll just do, since so many people aren't familiar with comic books, they might know vaguely from the movies, some of the American comic heroes. They're not familiar with a lot of like classic writers and runs. And so I thought I'd do one where like, I don't think most people are going to have read these runs. You might have heard of them, but you won't have read these runs. Now I will say, when it comes to the term run, I'm not using it in the most strict sense of like, it has to be like you come onto like potentially someone else's comic and you're just the writer that does like issues 17 to 48 split into 3 I'm not doing that. I'm just doing it basically when this writer wrote a comic. Any amount of comics, could be a trade paperback, few mini series, could just be their own original creation that never even ran beyond that. I'm just essentially doing a run of comics. Like, I'm not trying to be too strict. I am, again, though, trying to make it a little bit more obscure / not as obvious / not too mainstream. Although I will say, as I'll probably talk about at the end, I'm going to do a lot more classic things like just the 10 best or my 10 favorite of this person. Because I realize, to be fair, obviously the recommendations are good, but actually, I mean, my skill is to talk about what I like about it. So it doesn't matter if you've read Watchmen. The question is, what did I like about it, or what did I take from it, or what was the way I saw Watchmen through my lens, my models. So we're going to start out here. I'm going to start out immediately with one I'm pretty sure most of you have never read, because I think this is a tragically underread comic and underappreciated comic, and it is The Human Target, just Human Target, but this is actually one that existed already in for many years before, and this is Peter Milligan's run. Now, for those who don't know, I did an interview on this channel with Peter Milligan, the comics author, who did lots of classic stuff, Shade the Changing Man, Ecstatics and X-Force, go through Enigma. There's a whole bunch of stuff he did that was some awesome. It's someone I really enjoy. A lot of his work, and this is one of the best examples of it, is about identity. It's about like, what does it mean to be you and who you present yourself in the world, and does changing things about how you present yourself and how you think about yourself change how you feel about yourself and who you conceive of yourself as. And this is one of his best works at doing so, even though that is a very fundamental theme throughout Ecstatics and Enigma and Shade the Changing Man and all these classic series he's ever done. So this is one of the absolute best ones, because the premise is this is a guy who disguises himself as the person who's being targeted by like criminals, which sounds like what a weird concept. And so essentially that initial premise they didn't do much with originally, but you should see what he's able to do with that. It's a really clever, very, very creative comic, the way he's able to use it, because essentially, I'll give you a little hint, he does things like have the character almost like method acting style become the person, and there are times when, without giving any spoilers, maybe it starts to blur his identity, or maybe he over identifies those people. And also, because of this premise that he's getting a different gig each time, someone to show off, it essentially allows the comic to just change the setting and theme completely every time he's completed one job and he's going to the next job. Like, it's actually, you will be shocked how compelling this comic is. And even though like he's disguising himself and he's incredible at it, it's not really a superpower. Like, it's not really a superhero comic, quite frankly. So you'll have to see, it's one of those ones where if you want to get in a comics but you think like superheroes are a bit childish, which they are, or you're just like not a fan of superheroes in general, this type of a comic, and actually all of his non-comics work by Peter Milligan, is exactly the sort of stuff you want to get into. That and like the Ed Brubaker Criminal, and then European comics like Jodorowsky, I'll obviously reference some of that later on. So yeah, for me, This is a great starting point. You don't have to know anything else about comics. You don't have to know anything about Peter Milligan. It's just a really good adult comic book that has real, intelligent, interesting themes creatively presented. Then we're going to go with The Adventures of Luther Arkwright. By the way, that Human Target run was from 1999 to 2005. This is a really old school one because this is from 1987 to 1989. It is by Brian Talbot, who is a classic, legendary British comics writer and author. And this is an incredibly ambitious book. Like, essentially, you can sort of think of it as like the shit Hollywood elevator pitch would be like Doctor Who meets like intergalactic James Bond or something like that. Or if you know, like later on when I talk about Nikolai, there's elements of like almost that aspect. So what I would say is, it's like a really, really out there alternate history with like sci-fi concepts, but then also almost like, because it's like very British, it has like a very sort of like at the same time like a sort of formal sheen, and then the alien elements mixed with like personal aspects. The art style is a very unique black and white style of drawing, which I think again you'll just have to see. It's really unique and it is really suited to this particular type of comic because it's a British like indie comic, and it is not one that has to go through all the American bullshit comics code stuff. Even though it's from the 80s, this is an adult book. This is not for little kids. It's not simplistic. It doesn't just spoon feed you every aspect of the story. And crucially, because you're not going to have read this, it's not a big American comic, it's not Batman, it's not Spider-Man, you're not going to know anything about the character, you're not going to know anything about the world, and you're just going to be able to immerse yourself. And I would say essentially it's got elements that could be like a David Cronenberg movie with like Christopher Nolan aspects. Like, oh, this one really goes for it, boys. This is one where this is a very strong flavour, but I think it's fire. Like, the idea this came out in the 80s and this isn't referenced, along with some of the great masterworks, is crazy to me. Then we're going to go with Hitman. This was a run that lasted from 1993 to 2001. You will know the author if you know much about comics. It is Garth Ennis, he most famously of Preacher, and then in the modern day, The Boys, etc. I'm actually a big Garth Ennis fan. I do enjoy a lot of his work. He's one of those people I quite heavily disagree with, like some of the sentiments and opinions expressed, but I just think the way he does his work is so incredibly idiosyncratic. It's so strong, the flavour of it. He doesn't pull his punches. This is one of his more obscure works, even though it's actually within the DC universe. In fact, interestingly enough, the Hitman lives in Gotham, from what I remember. So as a result, one of the clever things about this series, but if you don't know, Garth Ennis doesn't like comics, hence why he did that one like The Pro, with it's like a prostitute superhero. He did The Boys, which is essentially about an excuse to kick the shit out of superheroes. Now they're all pieces of shit and corrupt, etc. He's not a fan of them. He's more someone who essentially likes to write comics. And if he had his choice, I'm sure he'd be like 100 years ago when it was like you just write about like military stories and all that sort of stuff for like boys. But in the modern day, everyone wants comics that are superheroes, right? So if you don't like superheroes, you shit out of luck. Unless you go Garth Ennis and you just got such talent, you just go, right, the Punisher, he's not really a superhero, is he? So let me write him. Oh, wait, the Boys, I'll write about superheroes, but I'll speak. So again, this is one where it's an excuse to write about superheroes. It's not really a superhero. It's more of an anti-hero. But because it's within the superhero universe, one thing that's quite clever about it is, first of all, it has that very caustic Garth Ennis wit, but also it's able to have crossovers with people like the Green Lantern. There's even one where, I'll mention him later, another obscure character within the universe, Resurrection Man. They have a crossover between those two, and he's able to meet him. So it's actually a very interesting in that sense, because they're intentionally putting it so he's sort of in the background of this wider world where you do know this continuum of Green Lantern and Superman and Batman, etc. So that already has quite an interesting aspect, but it's very much a humour and a sort of rowdiness and a naughtiness that you don't normally see in the DC Comics universe. The sense of humour is very strong within this series. Also, for someone who has powers, quite a unique power, like basically got bit by an alien and he has like telepathy and x-ray vision, but his profession is he's a hitman. So those are actually straight fire powers to have, but they're not the same powers as like Superman or the Green Lantern has. So you can see already, and something I like about comics in general from skilled writers, is I like it where necessity is the mother of invention. You limit the powers a bit, so you have to be a bit more creative as to what you're doing. A bit like that movie, if anyone saw it years back, that Nicolas Cage was in. The one where it was like, I can't remember the name of it now. It was like, he could sort of like see 30 seconds into the future only, but that was all he could do. So that sounds like that's a bit of a shit power, but it isn't though, is it? If you really know how to use it, that could actually be quite a compelling, quite fun adventure. Someone who could just see that far into the future. Then we're going to go with, I just referenced it, Resurrection Man. This is the original Resurrection Man, by the way, from 1997 and 1999, not the relaunch more recently. And this is written by Dan Abnett. Now, people don't know, I know Dan Abnett from 2000 AD, where he did like one of my all-time favourite series, which is Sinister Dexter. But I'm sure a lot of people watching this video who are nerds will actually better know him as one of the better authors, I haven't read them, but this is what everyone says, of the Warhammer books. Apparently he's written a lot of Warhammer books that were very good because he's just a skilled professional writer. I think the concept of this comic is straight fire. It's another, as I've alluded to with the Hitman, DC Universe one. But again, it's got crossovers with Superman and Batman, but it's not about that. And it's not that sort. Again, this is another anti-hero character. This is one where he's not really like just a good guy trying to do things. The premise for this one is genius. You'll see it's about a guy with amnesia. And essentially his power is he doesn't die, he gets resurrected when he dies. But that's not it. Every time he's resurrected, he has a different power that just randomly generates. So you can already see, if someone had a bit of skill as a writer, you could do a lot with that premise. And in this one, they do. Like, spoiler, he gets a lot of different powers. So I'm not going to spoil any of it, but that aspect alone is awesome. Because it means you never quite know where the story's going to go and then how they're going to solve the problems. Also, it's got this mystery element within it of like, who is this guy? And then they intentionally, cleverly, if you know some of the old DC lore, try and like imply like maybe he's this really old character, and if he's this old character, that would mean his natural enemy villain is this guy who, I won't say who, but if you know classic old school villains in DC, it's one of the best, actually, most underrated villains that you can have. And the way they use that character towards the end is pretty cool. I think it's like 27 or 29 issues of this or something in the original run. Also, by the way, the artwork for this is really good, because if you love 80s and 90s comic book art, this guy's one of the all-time classic artists, which is of course Jackson Butch Geiss. He's at this point in time, he's like an older guy, so it's kind of cool that they got him to do the art as well. And also, a bit like the Hitman, you don't really need to know the rest of the DC universe. You don't have to, it's not something where they're, oh, do I have to know the old Resurrection? No, you don't have to know any of that. Like, this is just a self-contained 27, 29 episodes. It's got quite a unique ending to it. And as I said, there was like a reboot or sequel. We're not talking about that right now. This is a one where I actually feel like, again, it's a self-contained one, and you don't feel like there's the weight of history and all the things you don't know to get into it. In at number 5, we have 1997 to 2012's Nikolai Dante by Robbie Morrison, who people might know wrote some of the later Authority books, if you remember that series that had like Warren Ellis and Garth Ennis and all that. He wrote some of the later books that were actually pretty good ones. If you're an American, you almost certainly haven't heard of this because it's a 2018 property, but it's not Judge Dredd, so you just won't be familiar with it. I think if you're American, you are going to love this comic, because what's great is it has that classic like Spider-Man / Marvel, like, you know, wit and banter, but it's just better, and it's written from a character who's cooler, and the way he pulls it off is funnier, and it actually has more wit to it. What's great about this series is it starts off really fun, but it's a series that can very easily shift into being serious. The powers this guy has, where he has like a sword that comes out of his hand, and he has like a sort of crest that essentially acts like a Jarvis type thing that sort of like advises him what to do, and he's like sort of on the edge of this like world of the aristocrats and the Romanov dynasty in Russia, but then at the same time he's just like nobody, pirate / vagabond. The aesthetic is really cool. As I say, they're able to make it fun and very light-hearted and one-off silly adventures with, you know, raunchy naughtiness and, oh wow, it's a little bit titillating, but then they're also able to go into like really serious things about like war and what it means to be a hero and what do you do about love and what if someone that you love is on the other side of, but they're actually also able to tackle some big things. And because it was in 2000 AD, essentially they like series to run a long time, so there's a lot of trades of this to read as well. Like if you get into it, you're going to be able to read quite a lot, and it really goes somewhere. But like the first say 3 or 4 are just really fun. If you like fun comics that have like a cool edge to it and funny, witty banter, this is going to be one of the best you've read. Again, as I say, Marvel Brain people are going to love this, even though it's actually good. It's actually good. Also, it has got this sort of like, some of the aesthetic is almost like a neo-renaissance, because it's like you've got futuristic sci-fi technology and weapons and stuff. But a lot of like how the society works and some of the dress looks almost like Napoleonic era, if you know what I mean. So again, quite a very unique theme, I would say. At number 6, we have got 1996's Flex Mentallo, which is a four-episode miniseries by Grant Morrison, one of the most legendary comic books writers of all time. I actually think this is potentially his masterwork / magnum opus. I also think The Filth is very, very good as well, but that's a much, much darker set of themes, etc. The Invisibles is incredible, but it's so sprawling and so long, and so many things happen to him, and in terms of how he's telling the story in different flavors, that I'd say like parts of The Invisibles hit amazing veins, and then some parts of it, like later on, they come off the boil a little bit. This is just so small that he's able to really pack a lot of different aspects and references and inspirations into it, and you'll think, well, it's only 4 issues. This is dense stuff. Like, this is a really full-on experience. I mean, I would compare, this is one of those comics where if you read it intently, it is comparable to sort of like, almost like psychedelics in terms of where it'll take your mind and your imagination. And crucially, on this, I mean, later, obviously, they classically paired up on All-Star Superman, but the artist is Frank Quitely, who is another Scot, just like Grant Morrison. And if people don't know his style is an incredible, very unique art style, where what I would say is this: it's an acquired taste. When you've never seen it before, it looks so alien, and initially, the characters all look quite similarly drawn and weird heads and stuff. But once you get into it, a switch flips and it just becomes really insane. And so people might know his new X-Men stuff looked great as well, the All-Star Superman. I'm a big fan of Frank Quitely's stuff, and it pairs so well with this particular story. It means there are so many shots that are like iconic and memorable and very uniquely framed. This was, interestingly enough, another reason why people won't have read it is it was out of print for many, many, many years. It came out in the 90s. Like, it wasn't until, I'm going to say, like, 5 years ago or something like that, something around that you could finally buy it, like, for real from DC Comics. Before that, like, I personally bought, like, individual issues off eBay back in the day, so they used to cost a fuck ton as well. A downside is, when they did this printing, though, they very heavily colorized it. Like, basically, it's claimed that the original colorization, like, something went wrong with it and it was too bright and gaudy, but I thought that added to, like, the psychedelic element. I thought it was brilliant. So I'm actually not as big a fan of the colorization of this newer one. So I would say, if you're a real hardcore fan and you really vibe on what I'm talking about, you're a Grant Morrison fan, I would say find, whether it's through some sort of digital means, find the original 4 issues and read them with the original coloring, and you're going to see, I think it's just more striking. I think it works better. This is like one of those examples of where people do like a director's cut, and sometimes the theatrical version is better. That can happen, believe it or not. I think it's also interesting, even though it's a really super out there concept of what they're doing with superheroes and what it means. And a lot of this is very personal, actually. It ends up becoming quite autobiographical and quite vulnerable in terms of like some of the conclusions towards the ends of the story. So yeah, I think it's just a very unique one. It's also a very short read. Number 7, don't worry, we're still getting a lot of the big authors in. We've got Alan Moore. Oh, just Alan Moore, but you won't have read this one. This is from 1985 to 1989. It is Alan Moore's Miracle Man. It's essentially his first truly great work. You'll know, obviously, he did awesome work on, like, Watchmen and V for Vendetta, etc. But this is the one where you can just see the seeds of everything Alan Moore is going to do in his career in this work, and you can tell he really seriously tackles this project in a very like mature and adult way, and he's not in any way trying to write little kids comics. This really shows you why Alan Moore could not be fucked with and cannot be fucked with in the comic sphere, because it has like the seeds of his future great works, like the way he deconstructs a character and then figures out what he thinks the essence of the character is, then rebuilds it, but in a modern context and in a way that's really interesting and cool and more serious and less childish, etc., and takes an original concept of like something silly of like, this is how they were created, and makes like, well, this is how it's done now. Also, the ambition of where this story goes. The first trade is essentially like a classic Alan Moore story, like a Watchmen of V for Vendetta. The second one, you're already starting to go like, man alive, this is like some of this is very dark, like how violent it can be, and he's hinting at some things. And the last trade, you will not even be able to conceive of how ambitious this is. Essentially, I've always pointed out, one thing I love about Alan Moore, he also goes to the absolute nth degree. So in the same way as he took Swamp Thing and took him out of bloody swamps in like America, and eventually had him like going through space and encountering civilizations that don't even speak English or words, Similarly, the level that he goes to with the family and let's say the future and what Miracle Man becomes, you can't even conceive of when you start out. You don't even know what OP means or how far you can potentially go with a story. And so you already see in this sense, Alamos is going to change this industry. And I think also some of the turns within it, like what happens with him and some of the other superheroes around him, what happens with his family, where it goes from there. Like I said, the first trade's more of a normal one, but then it gets really out there and he really, really is willing to roll the dice and gamble big that this is going to be like for all the marbles in terms of the stakes that he's playing out with these characters. Then we have got 1996 to 1998's Stormwatch by Warren Ellis. If people don't know, if you look at the characters, you might recognize some of these characters if you've ever read any of these issues, because it is the precursor series to The Authority. Warren Ellis is The Authority. Now, if people don't know, the funny thing was he did this awesome run on Stormwatch, then he started The Authority, and then famously he left after like the first trade or immediately, and then people took over like Mark Miller and all that. So, I said Garth Ennis, it was Mark Miller, obviously. A bunch of like a bunch of other famous British artists that took over and did their version of it, but Warren Ellis wasn't doing that. This is all Warren Ellis. And I think Warren Ellis is awesome at books that are about like groups of characters with like interpersonal dynamics, and essentially, as far as I can tell, he would just be a really good TV series writer. He really seems to nail dialogue and know how to make it punchy and fun. And then he's also just a very good professional scriptwriter, so he can just keep a story moving and have an interesting bad guy, an interesting resolution to the story, and then tie it into the personal machinations of the characters and what's going on with their relationships and their lives. So what's awesome about this one is, this is a fabulous concept for how to do a super team. Essentially, it's a governmental agency, whereas the Authority's more just like a super team, and they've gotten free of those bounds and they do what they want. And so the cool thing about this compared to the Authority is very existential. It's all like, what can we do with this power? And should we kill this person? And should we go into this? They have a leader of this group of some of the same people that you'll know from the Authority. And this character, the Weatherman, is a really cool character because is he a good guy? How does he work within this government organization? What's happening towards the end of the series with him? That aspect is really cool. Like if you ever made a movie, you'd have that guy played by like Patrick Stewart or something like it, and you'd do a really awesome, or like Anthony Hopkins or something. They would be able to do so much with this character. I think he's a really cool addition. If you've read The Authority, you'll know some of these characters are very unique. These are not your traditional superheroes. When they are, they're intentionally parodied. When they're not, they're some of the most unique powers you've ever seen. One guy, for example, draws his power from being in cities. So you can already think about what you could do with that story. What a unique concept, right? And as I alluded to before with the style of writing, I think it has very much a TV show feel. The joke is, I don't know why they're making stuff like The Boys and Preacher and stuff that doesn't even really make sense to do as a TV show the way they're doing it, and they don't really tackle what's in the book. This is just like, it almost begs, it's really late to do this as a TV show. You could nail it as long as you cast it well. Number 9 is going to be 2014's, at least in terms of when this came out. I'm guessing there's like a trade. Borgias by Jodorowsky. I'm a big fan of Jodorowsky. I've so often recommended the Incal, Meta Barons, the Techno Priest, some of what I think are the absolute best comics works ever. But you're actually never going to have read this one. Even if you've read those, it's very unlikely you've read this one, actually. I could have also gone with like Royal Blood or some of the other more out there. But I thought this one, because it has like a historical, real thing it's based on, might draw people in. I actually think he's someone where I'm sort of glad he didn't get the funding to make his movies. I actually think he's much better in comics than he is in film. And I think having these brilliant artists and then just his mind unleashed, his imagination, and then no rules around what he can do means he can really go out there in a way he wouldn't have been able to in the same way in his movies, or it would have been harder to pull it off and make it plausible. This is... And let me warn you right now, I'm not fucking around. This is an incredibly transgressive comic. This contains scenes that may well disturb you, that you may just think like, fuck, I wish I hadn't read that now. That's the thing though, because he's trying to take the concept of the Borgias and what was possible if you had that level of corrupt power and you were someone who's ruthless and what you could and would do with that power. I think, by the way, the art style selected for this really fits the period of when they're trying to tell this story. It's an incredibly unique story. It's one where I don't know if I'd read it a second time. I'm not really into transgressive stuff like this nowadays. It's more for people who like work like David Cronenberg, Takashi Miike. We're talking about that sort of a vein. Like, this is not for the faint-hearted at all. But again, you're not going to have read it, but it's a big one-off story that is based on the real characters and history, but obviously you use artistic license to go wherever the fuck he wants. Finally, we have got Lex Luthor, Man of Steel, a short, I think it was like a 3 or 4 issue mini-series by Brian Azzarello. Now, you might know Brian Azzarello most famously did the 100 Bullets series. How that has not become a TV series, I don't even know, because I feel like it'd be right up the alley of everyone who likes a lot of like The Wire and some The Sopranos and stuff like that. I can't even believe this never came out. That's one of the underrated comic series right there. Another great one with an awesome premise and lots of like one-off issues and different characters that come in, and you can sort of pick it up wherever you want, but then it has some legendary trades with certain arcs in it. How that's gotten forgotten, I don't know. He also did some quite interesting sort of like revival work on Hellblazer. Remember, normally Hellblazer classically, it's all about British artists, right? This guy brought his own very unique, I think he's American, brought his own interesting feel to it and really like did something different with the essence of the character, but was quite true to the character as well. What's cool about this short series is I love villains, but villains that have like a redeeming aspect, like Magneto or Lex Luthor. They're not pure evil. They're not only evil. They actually have very good reasons and intentions as to why they're doing it, and they have strong principles. So what I like about this is it's a very unique take on Lex Luthor. If you're a Lex Luthor fan, or low-key, you always slightly wish it worked out better for him, this is a really good one for you. You're going to really enjoy it. The twist's really nice. The art's quite interesting. And I think just the tone of this one, you really are seeing this from Lex Luthor's perspective. You are not at all in the normal headspace of Superman and what Superman represents. And I think it'll be quite shocking to some people if you know even the basics of the Superman mythos. Right. Obviously, I said earlier, I'm also going to not just only do obscure stuff and hipster picks and things you've never seen or heard or read. I'm just going to do my top 10. I'll do my top 10 movies and my top 10 comic books and my top 10 comic authors and all that jazz. We'll do them all. Obviously, if you want to support me, check out my Patreon, or maybe buy some of that GamerSupps tea, or just some lovely normal GamerSupps like pink grapefruit. 10% off with the code Thorin at gamesups.gg. The content I make here on Thorin's side is obviously not my primary full-time job, and as a result, it is made possible through the support of my Patreon community. And this video was kindly supported by Yerka86. Would you like to ask a question in my monthly AMA? I go pretty deep, even talk about sort of life analysis aspects. Do you want to choose a topic I focus on for one of my next solo videos? Maybe you want teasers, find out who the next fascinating but eclectic and esoteric guest I have for Thor Inquiry is. Or maybe take part in a private, exclusive, never-to-be-released one-on-one conversation with me for an hour. Well, if so, heed this call to action and join Thorin's side today via the Patreon link in the description box below.